Okay, now we are recording. So I will post. I'll post the recordings of our Zoom meetings on Canvas, so that those of us who are not able to attend will still have access to what we have gone over. There will be recorded lectures on Canvas as well, so not all of our lecture stuff, all of that information will be just available on the Zoom lessons. So anyway, my name is Sita Bhattacharjee. Please call me Sita. And I started out as a black and white photographer, but as with the rest of the world, have moved to digital photography, although I personally still love film, love to shoot it and to work in the wet darkroom, but this is the way of the world. We are digital, and so in this class we'll be working with Adobe Lightroom as our digital darkroom. So can you all see the syllabus up here in front of on the screen? Yeah? Okay, good. So the best way to get in touch with me is via email. So bhattacharjeesita at fhda.edu. Again, please call me Sita. I realize that my name looks a little intimidating, so just call me Sita. So welcome to Photo 4. This course is an introduction to the technical and aesthetic properties of digital photography. Excuse me, I'm allergic, I think. With an emphasis on the use of the digital SLR camera as a tool for electronic photographic image making. Additionally, you will work at creating efficient digital workflows using Adobe Lightroom as the primary digital darkroom. You will learn the technical aspects of photography, as well as how to use the camera as a tool for, sorry, this is blocked, for creating art and expressing conceptions, objectives, etc. You are encouraged to employ your aesthetic, intellectual, and emotional concerns as a basis for your photographic expressions. So, more simply put, we'll learn the technical aspects of photography, of the camera, how the camera works, and how we use it to create different effects and different types of photographs, which will allow you to express yourselves, excuse me, artistic, photographically, and how to best make an image that says what you want it to say. Okay. And of course, we use our lives, our experiences as a basis generally for the photographs that we make. Our world around us, which is of course quite contracted at this time, but in general, that's, unless we are, photographers who, I have to stop saying, it's a product of my generation. Photographers who are news photographers who do reportage or something of that sort. Okay, so no previous knowledge of photography is required for this class. Many of you, in fact, all of you have made photographs on your phones, if nothing else, and I'm sure that some of you have had some sort of experience, educational experience, photographically. But again, the class doesn't assume that. So for those of you who have had photography, it may be a little repetitive. I have found, personally, that it is often helpful to have information repeated by someone else. Another teacher may present information, will present information in different ways, and some teaching styles work better for us than others. So hopefully, even if some of this is repetitious for you, um, it will be beneficial. Okay. So, although no previous knowledge of photography or photo editing is required, you must be familiar with such basic computer operations as opening, saving documents, file management, copy, paste, etc. And I would be astounded if there's anyone in the class who can't use a computer, but you never know. Um, so you are now. This is a holdover, of course, from when we met in person. But students are encouraged to bring their cameras and instruction manuals to the first classes. So if you have questions about your cameras, of course, ask them. I don't claim to be an expert on all specific models of cameras, and that's why I mentioned the manuals. Um, I know how cameras function on a basic level, and I'm familiar with the more popular brands of cameras, Nikon, Canon, and to an extent, Sony's and Panasonics and Olympuses and so on. But if there's a specific problem, it's helpful if you have your manual, but if not, we can probably look it up online. You will need a digital camera, obviously, for this class, and preferably something called an SLR, a single lens reflex camera, one that looks like this, essentially. Um, but it's not, you don't have to have an SLR, but you will need a camera that allows you some measure of control over the camera's functions. And by that, I mean the aperture, the shutter, the ISO ratings, which we haven't gone over yet, obviously. Um, so you don't have to have an SLR. You can have a smaller camera, a hybrid camera, or even a smaller camera than that. But it does need to, you need to be able to control the camera. So phone cameras really don't work well for this class. But that said, we'll talk about that and access to cameras. Okay, and I also recommend that you have a portable external hard drive. And this was definitely true when we met in person on campus when you're using the school's computers. But I still recommend having an external hard drive, and we'll talk about why in a little bit. There is a recommended text for the class entitled A Short Course in Digital Photography by Barbara London and Jim Stone. And I do not require that you purchase the book. It's not inexpensive. So you will not be responsible for anything that's not covered in this class, either in the Zoom meetings or in the lectures that are posted on Canvas, and the videos. So it's a very good text, but you are not required to purchase it. Okay. And it says here, I may give assignments from it. I will not. I will not assign readings from the book, but it's still a useful thing to have. Okay, but you're not required. Okay. Any questions? Anybody? Any questions before we go on? All right. Grading, everybody's favorite. So, evaluation or grading will be based upon a written exam, and it's a multiple choice exam, the timely submission of assignments, participation, and overall effort. While you are required to turn in your assignments on time, you may redo them if there were technical problems. Also, with the exception of the final assignment, which of course is due at the end of the session, the term, you may redo assignments if you're unhappy with the grade. So if you're unhappy with your grade, talk to me, and, you know, and, and some of the assignments, you may redo them if there were technical problems. Also, with the exception of the final assignment, which of course is due at the end of the session, the term, you may redo assignments if you're unhappy with the grade. So if you're unhappy with your grade, talk to me, and Based on the strength and validity of your argument, I may or may not change your grade, but you may certainly redo the assignment for a better grade. And the higher grade obviously will be the one that's recorded. Okay. All exams and projects will be graded on a 1,000 point scale, and a minimum passing grade is a D or 60%. And the breakdown of grades follows. For some reason, or reasons that are unclear to me, De Anza College does not give out C minuses. I don't know why, but all the others are as you can see. There will be 4 technical assignments. Each one, that's not right. I better fix that. I apologize. So the first 2 are worth 100 points each, and assignments 3 and 4 are worth 200 each. So that is, the total is correct, but they're not worth 200 each. The exam is worth 200 points, and participation is worth 200 points for a total of 1,000 points. What is participation? We'll get to that in a minute. So the breakdown here of grades, what an A is, what a B, a C, a D. Obviously, the how correct the information is, how you followed the assignment, how well you followed the assignment, and how much more you put into it. So that you just did the assignment does not necessarily mean that that is A work, but you can see the breakdown. So A indicates excellent work. Student work demonstrates excellent skill, judgment, and application of principles and techniques. Conceptual foundation is exceptionally clear and engaging. Exceptionally strong relationship to the project topic. Effort, that it shows that you kind of went above and beyond. B indicates very good work. Student work demonstrates good skill, judgment, and application of principles and techniques. Conceptual foundation is strong and engaging. Strong relationship to the project topic. A C indicates average work. Student demonstrates average skill, judgment, and application of principles and techniques. Conceptual foundation is average and fairly engaging. Average relationship to the project topic. So if you went out and stuck your camera outside of the window 5 minutes before the assignment was due, but you did the assignment correctly, that would be probably a B or a C, somewhere in there. It's when you kind of go above and beyond, obviously put a lot of thought into the assignment, and the product shows that as well. That's when the grades, go above average. And of course, D's and F's. A D, you've done something, and an F indicates really you did almost nothing. Okay. I'm sure that none of those will be true of you guys. Okay. So participation for this online class means contributing to discussions about your work and various other topics, which will be assigned. So they're on Canvas within what are called the modules. There will be different sections, and in addition to the assignments, and you will do the assignment and then upload your images, we'll have some what are called discussions, and it's a separate section. You'll comment on the work of your peers, so you will submit your images, your assignments, not just to the assignment section, but to discussions, so that everyone can look at the images and see what's going on there and make comments. We'll also have what are called, for lack of a better word, critiques. So we'll look at your work as a group and talk about your work. Okay. Okay. If after my scintillating and moving introduction and discussion or whatever, if you decide for some inexplicable reason that you don't want to take this class, you don't like me, you don't like class, or life interferes, please drop it. So, and I'm not telling you to drop the class. I don't want you to. But if you cannot take the class, it's your responsibility to drop it. And I say that because you wouldn't want to end up with an F at the end, or a W at the end of the term. It's, who wants that? So I usually go through and see if people are doing the work, and I contact you if it looks as if you've disappeared, and to see if you are okay and things are going all right. And eventually, if people stop coming, I usually drop them, but I don't guarantee that I'll drop you. So if you must stop taking the class, it's your responsibility to drop it. Okay. I hope it doesn't come to that. Okay, finally, all work submitted for this course is to have been made for this class over the course of this academic quarter, and not therefore prior to June 29th, yesterday, 2020. So even if your work, you have this image that perfectly suits one of the assignments that you made 2 years ago, the image was made 2 years ago, don't submit it, please, but make a new image for the assignment. So I don't want you to recycle images. Can I tell if you have submitted something that you shot 2 years ago or 5 months ago? Yes, actually, because the information about every digital image is embedded in the image file, and it's called the metadata, and it tells the date, the date that the image was made, the camera that was used, the lens that was used, the settings that were used. If you have the GPS turned on, it will say where the image was made, and so on. So that information is there, embedded in the image file. Okay. Okay, any questions? Anybody? No? You're a quiet bunch. Okay. Important dates. The dean has not yet given us important dates, so we'll get to those. I believe the last day to add a class is July 7th. Is that right? I think it's the 7th. I will check that for you. And the dates for dropping and so on, I will get to you as soon as I have been given them. Okay. So, student learning outcomes. By the end of this quarter, you should be able to do certain things. Apply basic digital camera skills to create images, and demonstrate a working knowledge of the digital darkroom using Adobe Lightroom. So, as I said, apply digital camera skills to create images, learning the basics of the camera, how the camera functions in order to create images and to create successful images, images that do what you want them to do and say what you want them to say. And demonstrate a working knowledge of the digital darkroom using Adobe Lightroom, that is learning the basics of Lightroom, the application or program Lightroom, in order to organize your images and in order to manipulate them to certain extents to make a better, more successful image. Okay. A note on academic integrity, and what that means essentially is don't cheat. Do your own work, do your best. Right? And the Student Success Center is available to you all, to us all. Obviously, the campus is essentially closed, but you can still contact them online if you need help with academic issues. They have tutoring and so on, so you can contact them if you have the need. And finally, I do welcome your questions and comments. Truly, I encourage you to talk to me about whatever. My office hours are set at the moment for Wednesdays from, I think I said, did I put it? I hope I put it up here. No, I didn't. Sorry. It should be Wednesdays from 12:30 to 1:30, possibly 12:30 to 2:30. I have to see what the requirements there are. But again, my office hours will be on Wednesdays, and I will post the Zoom invitation for office hours, and so I will be hanging out on Zoom for that time, and you can pop in if and when you want to. Okay. And finally, this guy, Steve Sasson, with the first digital camera. He invented it in 1975, and it recorded to a cassette tape. Okay, I think that is it. So at the end, I think you just have one assignment visible. It's not due yet. We haven't talked about any of that information, so so don't worry about it. We will go over everything for each assignment before it's due. So I just put it there so you would have a sense, I guess, of assignments. Okay. So, any questions? Anybody? Anybody?
So, is this gonna be a scheduled class,
Okay.
like a Tuesday, Thursday class? Like a.
I would like you to let me know if this time will work for you in general, and I'll send out a general email with that query. If it doesn't work for the vast majority of you, we'll find another time. What else? Cameras. So hopefully most of you anyway have a digital camera or have access to a digital camera, which is what you will need for this class. If you do not, we do not have cameras to check out to you because we're not meeting on campus, sadly. So normally we would have a certain number of cameras to be checked out on a short-term basis anyway, just for a couple of days. So you would not have been able to check out a camera for the entire term anyway. But that, sadly, again, is not available to us. Excuse me. I recommend that you ask family and friends if anyone has an older digital camera lying around that's not being used. Many people have upgrade fever and want to get the newest or newer cameras, and they just have older cameras that they have set aside. So do ask around because, again, many people do have older cameras, digital cameras lying around that they're not using. And for our purposes, and actually in general, you don't have to have the newest, best camera to make excellent images. And we'll talk about in more detail why that is. But my camera here, I bought a few years ago at Costco, which is also a pretty good resource for electronics, and they have excellent return policies. But I bought this a few years ago at Costco. It's certainly not an upper end camera. It's a Nikon D7100, which isn't made anymore. It's been upgraded, I guess, I think to the D7200. But it's a fine camera. It does what I need it to do, and that's what's important. So if you're in the market for a digital camera, check out Costco. I don't wholeheartedly recommend buying a camera sight unseen online, especially if it's been used. If you're buying a new one and it's a reputable company, then that should be fine. If there's something wrong with it, you can talk to their customer service, you can return it if need be. But if you buy a camera sight unseen, a used camera on eBay, for example, you may or may not have recourse if there's something wrong with it. You're kind of going on faith that it's fine. And generally that's true. Generally people are honest, or if there's something wrong, they'll take things back. But you never know. So I would be careful about that. But again, my first piece of advice is to ask around if you don't have a camera. All right. And the most important thing is to be making images, to be going out and making images. So the assignments for the class are technical assignments where you that are given in order to learn things about technical aspects and controlling the functions of the camera. But the class also is primarily about learning Lightroom. And so it's important that you have images to work on in Lightroom. And in many ways, it doesn't really matter what those images are, so long as you have images to work on. Okay. So the first assignment, not a graded assignment, but the first thing I want you to do is just to go out and shoot, so that you have some images to work on in Lightroom. Now, Lightroom itself. Some of you may already have Lightroom, but many of you probably don't. And De Anza has gotten permission from Apple to give you access to Lightroom for no charge through August 15th. So once our enrollment is settled and we know who's in the class, I'll give your names to the dean, and then in some form or fashion, in some way, you'll have, I don't know, an access code or something of that sort that you will give to Apple, and then they will give you access to Lightroom for the next 6 or so weeks. After that, I assume that if you want to continue, you'd have to buy or lease Lightroom, which is how things work these days. So Apple gives a substantial discount for students and teachers if you want to own Lightroom or lease it. And I think it's $20 a month for the suite, all of the Adobe Creative Suite, which includes Lightroom, Photoshop, and a host of other applications for working on images, for publication, and so on. And I think that if you just want Lightroom and Photoshop, it's $10 a month. But you should check that out through Apple. Also, collegebuys.org, I'll post that, has a good price if you're a California resident, so I will post that, and you can check that out. So if you're a student, you have to prove that you're a student. I think maybe scanning or taking a photo of your college ID. If you do that, then you may be able to get an even better price, but I'll check that out for you. Okay. Any questions? Anybody? No. Okay, so again, you will need a camera, and we will work on access to Lightroom itself. So I want to, since we're here together, I want to talk about the basics of the camera and the lens a little bit. Let me just pull up our class again. Just a moment. Sorry, every time I change a page, I have to go back into Zoom and share the page, and if I change the page even within the same application, it disappears and I have to reshare it. So anyway, so here's our home page in on Canvas, and if you look to the left, there's a whole list of words. So let me just get into your view here. Okay, can you all see this with a little purple line at the bottom where it says student
Yep.
view? Great. So here on the left is a list of places you can go, and I think for the most part you'll be working in modules and assignments, also home and announcements, but I just want to go to modules for a moment. So here in modules, you have a list of sections. So the modules are sections, and right now 4 of them are visible, and more will become visible as we go on over the summer. So the first one says Lightroom, and within that, the first one has instructional videos. And so because we're not meeting in class, I have found these to be very helpful. Can you see these? Or I think I need to reload that page. Just a moment. So Lightroom instructional videos, and these are done by a woman named Julianne Cost, who has worked for Adobe for many years. And if you go to her site or Adobe's site, her instructional videos are available there. I think they call her a Photoshop and Lightroom guru or something like that. But she is very straightforward. She presents things simply and clearly, and so I put these up here as a resource. Let's see. Somehow they got out of order. Anyway, at the top, hopefully, somewhere here is the intro. Here we go. It is at the top. Overview of Lightroom, and then so on, some of the basics. So please do make use of those. They're not long. I don't think any of them are longer than, maybe 5 minutes. So you won't be, it's not a huge commitment of time. You won't be sitting there for an hour and a half if you start one of her videos. Okay. But again, they're very useful, or I find them to be very useful. Back to the module page. Under that is creating your own personal Lightroom catalog. So I give instructions, and we'll go over that. Resources, just general resources for you as students, Canvas resources. And then the basics, cameras, and then lenses. So I want to start going over those a bit, just in a general sense. At the bottom of each, it's supposed to be at the bottom. At the bottom of each module, it says CETA's class notes, and those are notes that I've written out that we'll go over, but that will continue to be available to you. Okay. There are also readings. So readings. Oops. Readings on the camera. Basic terms, and so on. So please look at them, please read them. But we will be going over at least some of this stuff in the Zoom lessons, but not necessarily in the detail that maybe you want or need. So there are written lectures as well. Okay. Excuse me. So I would like to talk about the camera for a little while. I showed you the digital camera that I have. We all, of course, have our phones, and if nothing else, we use these. And you know, in many ways, the best camera that you have is the camera that you have with you. And if that happens to be your phone, so be it for life in general, because you have it with you. For this class, again, I would like you to have a camera that gives you more control over the functions. But for everyday life, they're great. They make exceptionally nice images, high quality images. So I am not knocking the phone camera. This phone makes images that are so much better than the first digital camera that I had about 20 years ago. So cameras are referred to by their capacity, by the amount of information that they can record, and that is described in megapixels, which we'll talk about. This camera has a capacity of, I think, 7 megapixels, and my first digital camera was a Nikon Coolpix 950, and it had a capacity, I think, of 1.7 megapixels. So this is almost infinitely better in terms of the quality of the image, and yet that camera made very nice images. Because the resolution, the amount of information that was recorded was so much less, the images didn't look great if you blew them up. But that is, if you printed them out at 5x7 or 8x10 or larger especially, they just kind of fell apart and looked blurry and blobby. But if you think about it, how many of us regularly print out our images? Very few. And out of those of us who make prints of our images, how many of us make big prints? That number goes down, or the percentage goes down even more. And I'm sure you've noticed that images online on your screens usually look really good, even if they are smaller files. It's only when you enlarge them, either on the screen or if you print them out, that they start to look bad. So again, many of us rarely print out our images, and so having the best camera that has incredible resolution is kind of wasted on many of us. Not everyone, certainly, but on many of us. Okay. So I just want to talk about the camera for a little bit. The cameras that we use digitally are, of course, point and shoot ones like this, where you don't have very much control, or little ones that you turn on and the lens pops out. But those also give you minimal control over the image. The most popular, commonly used type of camera is called the SLR. And as you see up here, that stands for single lens reflex camera. And then a D in front of it, it says digital single lens reflex camera. And it's called a single lens reflex camera for two reasons. The first is that it has one lens, with a single lens, which sounds silly, right? It's like, well, of course it has one lens. But there are cameras called TLRs, or twin lens reflex cameras, that have two lenses. And so that is, the SLRs distinguishes itself from the TLR. The reflex refers to something that's built into the camera. That is called a reflex mirror. It's built in here. And that's what allows us to see what will be recorded by the camera before we take the picture. So let me bring up some information here. Just a moment. Sorry, my internet service is not great, so it's slow, and I apologize for that. Let me just get this back up. So the SLR, single lens reflex camera, and this is my slightly dodgy diagram of it. So when seen from the side, light enters the camera through the lens, and the purpose of the lens is to focus the light entering the camera. So you can use a camera without the lens on, and so I'll just take the lens off here. And the camera will function. It'll take a picture, it'll release the shutter, but without the lens, everything will be blurry. So it's the lens that focuses the light entering the camera, just as we use glasses for those of us who need them to help focus the light entering our brains, right? So after the light enters the camera through the lens and is focused, it is intercepted by that line, the diagonal line that you see there, which is called the reflex mirror. And I don't know, it's hard to get a reflection here so that you can actually see I don't think you can. But anyway, right in here, there is a mirror. There you can kind of see it. And this mirror bounces the light up into this area of the camera, into which is embedded something called a pentaprism. Penta meaning five, pent for five, and it's a five-sided prism, and it bounces the light around and then out through the eyepiece, the back of the camera, to your waiting eye. So there is an offset in the level between where the eyepiece is and where the lens is, of about an inch or so. And this is what allows us to see the information entering the camera, even though there's that offsetting. So again, the light is bounced up, the reflex mirror bounces or reflects the light up into the pentaprism, which allows us to see what will be recorded. In the eyepiece, we can see what will be recorded before we actually make the image. So let me put the lens on again for a moment. And so we compose our image, we get everything ready. We set the camera, which we'll talk about later on. And then when we take the picture, several things happen at the same time. So in order to take the picture, we of course push this button at the top, which is called the shutter release button. And when we do that, a couple of things happen, essentially simultaneously. And of course, I can't talk about them simultaneously. But the first thing that happens when I release the shutter, or I push the button, is that the reflex mirror pops up out of the way, as you can see in this diagram. And that allows the light to continue back into the body of the camera. And it then meets or is intercepted by something called the shutter. And here is the shutter, right here, this window back here. And the shutter is one of two mechanisms that we use to control the amount of light entering the camera. The shutter controls the length of time that light is allowed into the camera. So it's a window that opens and closes. And you can control, if you have a camera that gives you control, you can control how long the shutter remains open. So that was 1 second. You can see that the shutter opens, and you probably can't see this as well, but when I do that, the reflex mirror pops up out of the way and the shutter opens, and this allows light to pass all the way back into the body of the camera, where it's intercepted. In this case, this is a film camera, so it's intercepted by the film, which goes back here. This is the film plane, and exposes the film to light. And with digital cameras, in place of the film, there's a sensor. And we'll talk about sensors in a bit. And the sensor records the information. And then the shutter closes, the reflex mirror goes back into place, and the camera is ready for you to make another image. Right? So that is how the SLR functions. We, of course, have digital cameras, and so we don't have film. With digital cameras, you cannot open the back and see the digital sensor, which is all to the good because they're very, well, and film is too, but they're very, very sensitive. You don't want to expose them to the elements, so to speak. You want to keep your lens on and so on. So you can open everything up and take a look at the sensor from this side. You can take the lens off and lock up the reflex mirror and open the shutter and lock the shutter open, and then you can access the sensor, but I don't recommend that you do that. Okay. The camera itself. A couple of basics. Never take the lens off. Never take the memory card out, which I'll talk about in greater detail. Never do those things when the camera is powered on. Always, always make sure the camera is powered off, the off button here, before you do anything of that sort. So when the power is on, electricity is going through all of the components and so on. And when they are powered on, they act almost like a magnet. They pull things in, and you can pull, if you take the lens off with the camera powered on, you can pull dust into the camera. And dust, with film cameras, with digital cameras, dust is our enemy. Dust on film, dust on the sensor is a nightmare because it means that these blobs or little specks will be in every image that you make. So you want to be really, really careful about letting anything into the camera. In addition, you can corrupt or damage the files that are on your memory card. So we'll talk about how the camera functions in greater detail, but when you make an image, the sensor records the image. It then converts that information into digital form, and then transfers the information to a memory card. And the memory cards go into the camera, and that's where your images live until you move them. So this is a memory card, and they come in different types, two main types, different types and in different capacities. But if you take the memory card out of the camera, when the camera is turned on, when it's powered on, you can damage the information that's on the memory card. So always make sure that your camera is powered down, it's turned off, before you take out the memory card, and again, before you take the lens off. Okay. Any questions? Anybody? So that is the basic way that cameras function. There are cameras that do not have reflex mirrors, and the information enters the camera directly through the lens back to the film or the sensor. With film cameras, that could be a problem because there is this offsetting between what you see and what you get. Hang on one sec, that's not where I wanted to go. With digital cameras that do not have the reflex mirror, the information just goes right through and you can see it on the LCD at the back of the camera. There's often a delay in seeing this with the smaller digital cameras, and apparently you don't see the entire frame, but still you get the information there. Okay. In the past, there are different sizes of these cameras and different sizes of film. That is still true, although things have been more standardized. But SLRs, this type of SLR, falls into what's called the small camera format category, or small format camera category, as opposed to medium and large format cameras. And large format cameras were the first cameras, and although they're large, they're actually the most simple. There are very few electronic large format cameras, for example. So as time went on, the formats got smaller and more complex and electronic. These cameras fall into a category that's called 35 millimeter, and that's because these cameras use 35 millimeter film, as opposed to some other small format films, 110, 126, that were available in the past. 35 millimeter film, as I'm sure you've all seen, comes in a little cartridge that's about an inch and a half, couple of inches high, and it's called 35 millimeter because the width of the film itself, or the height here, is 35 millimeters. And some of you, I think, have probably used film. Some of you have not. But the film looks like this after it's been processed. And these rectangles are the images that are formed on the film. And the dimensions are the dimensions of the shutter at the back of the camera here, this window, 24 by 36 millimeters. And these dimensions have been transferred over, carried over to digital photography. And so if you've looked at SLR cameras in a store, or have bought your own camera, you might have noticed that some of them say full frame. And what that means is that the digital sensor that records the information is the same size as the shutter in film cameras, 24 by 36 millimeters. And this is desirable. The larger the sensor, the more information is recorded. And so 24 by 36 millimeters is the largest that a sensor can be on this type of camera, the 35 millimeter format digital camera. Many digital cameras, my own included, do not have full-size sensors, even though this camera in dimensions, in appearance certainly, and in dimensions is very close to or the same as a camera that has a full-size sensor. This one does not. And it's cheaper. It costs less money than the full-size sensor bodies and the lenses that go along with them cost. So for me, that's not in general a problem. I couldn't afford a full-size sensor camera and the host of lenses that goes along with those cameras. So the lenses are different, and we'll talk about lenses, definitely. But for my purposes, this works fine. So cameras of this sort, of the sort I have, come often in kits, and you'll see that in different stores, at Costco, Best Buy, wherever. The camera, the body comes with one or two lenses, and they'll throw in a memory card and maybe even a bag for you. And they have different price levels. You know, some at about $500 or $600, then about $1,000, up to $1,200 or $1,300. With the full-size sensor cameras, the body alone will cost at least $1,500, and then they go up from there into the many, many thousands of dollars. And then you have to purchase lenses for them as well. So eventually, if you're going to buy a camera, these are things you need to think about. As I said earlier, the vast majority of us don't need a camera that, you know, like an $8,000 camera body. We need a camera body that does what it's supposed to do, that has at least a moderate capacity for giving us a detailed image, but most of us just don't need a camera at that level. But again, that's something for you to think about and decide as time goes on. Excuse me. Any questions? Anybody? I can't tell you. Obviously, I don't know if you're awake or not because I can't see a lot of you. I hope I haven't put you to sleep completely. Okay, so 35 millimeter film is one type of film. There are other sizes of film. So 120, as you can see here, is another size, and that supports medium format cameras. And those are larger cameras that use larger film. And they come in different styles with different dimensions of the shutter, which give different size and shapes of images. And there are digital medium format cameras as well. Because these cameras have even larger sensors, they cost even more money. So there are different styles. So I mentioned that the SLR is called that to distinguish it from the TLR, the twin lens reflex camera, which you can see here, kind of. That's my drawing of it. And large format cameras look kind of like that. So if you've ever seen someone out on the street with a big dark cloth over them fiddling with some something that's probably a large format camera. Large format cameras don't use roll film, they use sheets of film, and they're big, bulky things, not they're definitely not great for action photography, sports photography, wildlife photography. They're great for portraiture, for still lives, for studio work, but they're big, bulky things that don't allow you to make image after image in the way that film does, or certainly digital cameras do. You can only make them one at a time. They have big film holders that only hold 2 sheets of film. So why, you might ask, would anybody want to use them? They make beautiful images. But also the size of the film itself gives you much, much more information. So if you're shooting 35 millimeter film or sensor, you have a sensor piece of film that's about this size, you know, 1 inch by maybe 1.5 inches. And that information, the amount of information that's recorded, is set. And so you can make a big print from that little piece of film, but you're not increasing the amount of information in it. You're just increasing the size of it. So perhaps you've seen images or prints that look as if they're made up of blobs of black and white and gray, or colors. And what you're seeing there are the actual grains of silver that make up the film, just blown up. If you have more information, so if you have an 8 by 10 inch piece of film and you want to make an 8 by 10 inch print, there's no enlargement involved. It's a 1-to-1 ratio, so you never blow anything up at all. So having a larger sensor is actually a great advantage in terms of the sharpness, in terms of the clarity of the image, and you can make them really big. So for posters or for billboards, for example, the image holds up really well when you blow it up. Okay, so those are camera types. Any questions? Anybody? No? No. Okay, so I want to talk about lenses, and then we'll call it a day. Modules. So hang on here. So I'm back to the module page, and I'm going to skip ahead a little bit and go down to the next module, which says the lens. And there are readings here for you as well. Please do read them, the different types of lenses. But I'm going to go to my notes again, and hopefully this will come up at some point. It will load. Here we go. So the lens. The lens is in some ways the most important part of a camera. It's not the only one, but the lens determines the sharpness of your image, the quality of your image in many ways. And so I'm not talking about the sensor and how much information is recorded, but the quality of that information. So our eyes, of course, have lenses, and the lenses in our eyes are what focus the light entering our brains, and that information is transmitted back to the brain via the optic nerve. And it's a miraculous thing, our eyes, our brains, and how our bodies function, but that's a different topic altogether. But the lens, again, focuses the light entering the camera. So lenses are made up of, modern lenses are made up of elements of ground glass, that is, pieces of glass that have been ground to precision to focus the light entering the camera. And modern lenses have more than one element of glass in the body of the lens. So our eyes obviously have one lens, our glasses one lens, or one element of glass. But modern camera lenses are made up of more than one piece of glass. And they come in different lengths. As I'm sure you've seen, some cameras have enormous lenses, others have really tiny ones. The length of the lens is called the focal length of the lens. And the focal length of the lens is not the actual length of the barrel of the lens, the physical length, but the distance between 2 points, one of which is located in the lens and the other of which is located in the body of the camera. So I hope you can all see this. Let me just move this over. Oops, scheisse. How did I do that? Oh, Sita. How did you do that? There we go. Can you still see that? Can you still see my little diagram here? Anybody? Yes, no?
Yes.
Yeah, we can still see it.
Yes?
Yeah.
Yes, okay, thank you. All right. So, when light enters the body of the camera, it does so through the lens, and then it's focused at a point within the lens. And that point is called the nodal point. It's the optical center of the lens. It may not be the physical center, so if your lens is an inch long, it may not be at exactly half an inch, but it's called the optical center of the lens because that's the point at which the light is focused. It's then transmitted back into the body of the camera, where, of course, we have the that reflex mirror and the shutter. But eventually, the light reaches the sensor or the film plane. Okay, and the distance between those 2 points, the nodal point in the lens and the sensor or film plane located in the body of the camera, that distance is called the focal length of the lens. And that is how lenses are described. So when somebody asks me what lens I have, I will tell them what the focal length of the lens is. And that is printed here, if you can see it, right here. It says 50 millimeters. So that is what's called the focal length of this particular lens. And your lens will have a different focal length. So lenses come in many, many different focal lengths. And so I want to talk about those and what happens when you have different focal lengths of lenses. Lenses fall into 3 main categories depending on the focal length of the lens. So again, here, the distance between the nodal point located in the lens and the sensor film plane located in the body of the camera is the focal length of the lens. Okay, and again, that's how we describe the lens. So if somebody comes up to me and says, Sita, what lens do you have on your camera? I'll say I have a 50 millimeter lens. Okay, or whatever lens I happen to have on that camera. So, 3 main categories. The first category is called normal. And do I have another description here? No, that's it. Okay. So normal lenses are called normal lenses because the angle of view, that is the amount of information that you see through the viewfinder, when you look through it, that angle of view will approximate the angle of view that you have, that the normal human eye has. So when you look out into the world, you have a central portion of your vision. And that is the stuff that you see without having to look around or even, turn your eyeballs at all. And then as you go out, the angle becomes wider, and there's more and more information which you don't actually see in the central portion of your field of vision. You have to turn your head or at least move your eyes. And as you go out and out, the angle gets wider and wider, way out into peripheral vision, right? So out there, I can kind of see that my fingers are, that there's motion. But if I didn't know it was my fingers, I might not know what was moving. I just have a sense of something there, right? But normal lenses give you an angle of view that approximates that of the normal human eye, of what you see in the central portion of your field of vision. And those focal lengths, as you can see here, fall into a certain range, from about 63 millimeters down to 35 millimeters. How they settled on 63 instead of 60 or 65, I don't know. But anyway, there you have it. So you can say 65. The longer the lens, the narrower the angle of view. And so if I go from a 63 millimeter lens to a 50, I'll see a bit more information. Wow, my hands look really weird at this. Anyway, and as I go down to a 35 millimeter lens, I get more information in my viewfinder. In the past, the most commonly seen focal length was a 50 millimeter lens. So if you went out to buy a camera that came with a lens, and generally in the past, if you went and bought a body, you bought a lens with it, hopefully. And the lens that came with it was almost always a 50 millimeter lens, as you see on this camera. So that's the most commonly seen normal lens. And there are, if you ever go to a used camera store, or in their past, there used to be, these camera like conventions, swap meets where you could buy equipment. There are thousands, there are millions of 50 millimeter lenses out there, used 50 millimeter lenses, because they were by far the most common lens that was sold. But they're not the only normal lenses. So 35 millimeter lenses are also commonly seen and used. And I just want to point out that this is different, that these are different than 35 millimeter photography. That this 35 millimeter photography or format is called that because of the 35 millimeter film, the film that comes in those cassettes. 35 millimeter lenses, excuse me, are called that because they have a focal length of 35 millimeters. So I just want to be clear about that difference. The next category of lenses is called wide-angle lenses. And they're called that because the angle of view that you have on these lenses is greater or wider than the angles of view that you have on normal lenses. And when the angle of view is greater, you have more information. So with a normal lens, you might see my face, but with a wide-angle lens, you'd see my face and more information on the sides. So the shorter the focal length of the lens, the wider the angle of view and the more information you see. The longer the focal length of the lens, the narrower or smaller the angle of view and the less information you see. So wide-angle lenses start at about 28 millimeters, which are mildly wide-angle lenses, and then the focal lengths decrease. They get shorter and shorter and shorter. And as the focal length gets shorter, the amount of information that you see increases. You see more and more information out to the sides. And some very short lenses can give you an almost 180 degree angle of view, 180 degrees being a straight line. As the focal length increases, as you get wider and wider angles of view, you get more and more of a kind of distortion, and that is a bending of the light that enters the camera. So distortion is something, means that something is being changed relative to how it should be. And with wide-angle lenses, you get something called barrel distortion. So you know, barrels bulge outward, and that's called convex. They bulge out. And that's what actually happens to the light with wide-angle lenses. The light is bent, so it bulges. And so if you've ever seen an image of a room, let's say a room filled with people, all the way out to the edges of the image, of the frame, and at the edge, the people look like they're kind of stretched out like that, like a Gumby. Those images were made with wide-angle lenses, and what you're seeing is that bending of the light, of distortion, that distortion. You'll also see that with buildings, for example, that are photographed with wide-angle lenses. The vertical lines no longer look vertical. They're bent, and they may kind of recede upward like that. So the shorter the lens, the wider the angle of view, the more of this barrel distortion you get. And some people really like that effect. They like to fill their frames with information, and they like that distortion. Other people hate it, and they don't want any distortion or changing of what is, you know, of what it should be. And so people who hate that effect generally don't use wide-angle lenses. They use normal lenses. And so the type of photography that you want to do will, in large part, determine the kind of lens that you want to use. If you look down here, I mentioned something called a fisheye lens. And fisheye lenses are specialty lenses. They usually cost a lot of money, unless they're really cheap ones. And they bulge out. And so they also are convex. And they look kind of like fish eyes, which is one reason they're called that. Also, if you think about fish, a fish has eyes on either side of its head. And so this gives the fish 180, essentially 180 degrees, 180 degree angle of view, or perhaps even more, with crossover between the eyes in the center, but it allows the fish to see way, way back. And the fisheye lens sort of does that as well. So the fisheye lens gives you extreme distortion. It usually gives a circular image, but it can also give essentially an incredible amount of information. Again, they're specialty lenses. Many people really don't like that extreme distortion. Other people do. Okay. The opposite of the wide-angle lens is called the telephoto lens. And telephoto lenses are longer than normal lenses, longer than wide-angle, longer than normal lenses, and they give an angle of view that is narrower than that of the normal human eye. And so the effect of that is magnification. So let's say I'm looking at all of you in a classroom setting, and I just want to photograph somebody who's sitting in the very back of the room. If I make that image with a normal lens, I'll get some of the rest of you. If I make the image with a wide-angle lens, I'll get a lot or all of the rest of you. And then I might have to crop you all out. If I use a telephoto lens, which has a narrow angle of view, I can isolate that one person in that field, in my field of vision. And the longer the lens and the narrower the angle of view, the more it appears I've come in close. So telephoto lenses come in different focal lengths, starting at about 70 millimeters and then increasing in length. And here are some of the more commonly seen telephoto lenses. out to 1,000 millimeters or even 5,000. So we said that a fisheye lens has an angle of view of 180 degrees, roughly. A 1,000 millimeter lens has an angle of view of 2.5 degrees, which is minuscule compared to almost any other lens. And of course, as the focal length increases, the physical length of the lens, the barrel of the lens, gets bigger and bigger as well. So these long lenses need their own support, need their own tripods or monopods, because if you had the camera body on a tripod, well, it would probably just fall over because of the weight of the lens, or it would put extreme stress on the connector between the lens and the body of the camera. So if you've gone to or seen sporting events, for example, you see a whole array of photographers with huge lenses on tripods or monopods. And so if you've seen images, I almost always use tennis or soccer examples, but if you've seen a photograph of Rafael Nadal playing tennis with a ball of sweat hanging off his nose, that image obviously was not made with the camera standing right under him, photographing him. That would obviously disrupt play, if nothing else. So that image and images of that sort were made from way back in the press area with a really long lens. Wildlife photography, so an image of a Bengal tiger where you see the beautiful detail, the hairs on its nose and so on. Well, if the photographer had been right in front of the tiger in the Sundarbans in India, it would have been the last image he or she ever made, probably, and a nice legacy. But so that photographer was at a safe distance, probably behind some blind or something, using a really long lens to make that image. And so long lenses are used when you can't or shouldn't come in really physically close to the subject. You use a long lens in order to get that effect anyway. So again, the type of photography that you want to make will determine the kind of lenses that you will end up using in photography. And that's not set in stone, obviously. You're not just going to have one 1,000 millimeter lens, probably. And so that brings me to the next category, which is a subcategory of lenses called zoom lenses. And I'm going to guess that almost all of you have zoom lenses. And zoom lenses incorporate many focal lengths into one lens. So the lenses that we've been talking about are called fixed focal length lenses, or prime lenses. And each lens has just one set focal length, like this lens here, 50 millimeter lens. This lens is a zoom lens, and it incorporates many focal lengths into this one lens. So I can extend it out or pull it back. And so it goes from wide angle to telephoto in one lens. And there are many, many different configurations of zoom lenses. So again, zoom lenses incorporate many focal lengths into one lens. There are more configurations than I can list. So these are some of the more commonly seen configurations of lenses, but your camera may have a different one. But most, they go from wider angle to more telephoto. Not all of them go into the telephoto range. Some of them don't go into the wide angle range. Some of them span the entire thing. So some kit cameras come with lenses that range from 18 to 300 millimeters, and that's an incredible range from extremely wide angle all the way out to extremely telephoto. So the advantage of the zoom lens is that you get all of these focal lengths available to you without having to buy 2 or 4 or 10 or 200 different lenses. So yeah, they are incredibly convenient. Even if you have other lenses, it means that you don't have to stop and swap out the lens. And so that said, there are of course disadvantages to the zoom lenses. The first is that they're not quite as sharp as the fixed focal length lenses. So if you do side-by-side comparisons, you can see that the zoom lenses are not quite as sharp, but that said, they certainly hold up. They make very good images. The second disadvantage is something that we haven't talked about yet, but we will, and that is that the maximum aperture, that is the opening within the lens, is not as great. And it's desirable to have a large maximum aperture for a couple of reasons. But zoom lenses don't open up as far. But in spite of those disadvantages, certainly for most amateur photographers and many professional photographers working out in the field, the zoom lens has the advantages of the zoom lenses outweigh the disadvantages. And so I don't think there are any kit cameras that come with fixed focal length lenses anymore. They all come with zoom lenses. That said, if there are any of you using fixed focal length lenses, that's great. Any lens should work for this class. Okay. So, any questions? Anybody? Anybody? Okay, well, that's it for today. If you do not have a camera, please do get your hands on one as soon as you can. So our term is only 6 weeks long, as opposed to the normal 11 to 12 weeks for regular quarter. So everything's compressed in time, so we have to get going really quickly. We will meet again on Thursday at the same time. I'm not saying that we will continue to meet twice a week via Zoom, because there will be lectures posted. But I hope to continue at least somewhat so that we can check in and see each other and so on. But again, get your hands on a camera as soon as possible. I would like you to have images ready to work on by Tuesday, a week from today. So start shooting, and if nothing else, you can work on images that you have made on a camera. On a on a phone. For the time being, just so that we can get working in Lightroom, okay? But again, do get your hands on a camera if on a digital camera if you don't have one yet. Okay, any questions? Nothing? Okay, in that case, I'll have office hours tomorrow, and I will send you the Zoom invitation for the office hours, and as with this, the invitation for our regular lectures, that will be good through the term. So I'll have office hours tomorrow. If you have any questions, I'll just be hanging out on Zoom, and then we'll have another regular Zoom meeting on Thursday at 12:30. Okay. Well, all right then, quiet bunch. Very nice to kind of see you. And see you again on Thursday. All right? Take care.
Bye.